on our home state, California. $675 billion a year economy in terms of global trade, just 2024, $183 billion specifically in exports. I'll remind everybody that we have more Fortune 500 companies in California than any other time since 2010, more than any other state in the nation. We're number one, not just in Fortune 500 companies, but we're number one in manufacturing, $412 billion a year. No other state comes close in terms of its manufacturing output. Number one in agriculture, $59.4 billion a year in output. Innovation, we simply have no peers. And I'll highlight a point of reference, also a point of pride. The UC system, and this is interesting, has 12,700 active patents, more than any other system in the world. 9% of all of the academic investments in terms of innovation, entrepreneurialism are occurring currently within the UC system. Again, that innovation ecosystem is what separates the game we play, the game played by everybody else. Of course, IPOs are a proof point of that. Over 1,300 IPOs since 2011 have come from the state of California. That's 2x any other state. No one comes close. 55+% of the venture capital in the United States of America comes from the state of California. In every critical category, California dominates, including representing 18% of the R&D in the world. 22% comes from China. 21% of the world's R&D comes from Germany. California, as a subnational state, represents 18% of the world's R&D. It's a point of deep pride. Unsurprisingly, it's a consequence of California's growth and its resiliency. The population of California continues to grow. Back-to-back years of growth, including last year, the census data, 232,000 people, population growth here in the state of California. Speaking of growth, the IMF put out their assessments showing the growth of the economy in the state of California. You could see other competing economies, United States, China. You can see the 6% output in the state of California last year. We simply have no peers. No longer the fifth largest economy in the world or the fourth largest economy in the world. With some humility, let me suggest that if India continues on their pace, we may go back to our original form. But nonetheless, California's $4.1 trillion a year output places us as the fourth largest economy in the world. That said, we don't live in Plato's Republic. California is under assault. The United States of America, in many respects, is under assault because we have a president that's been reckless in terms of assaulting those growth engines. Has created a climate of deep uncertainty and certainly has California in his sights. You can see just from this headline alone, New York Times, dozens and dozens of headlines as it relates to an assault on research, an assault on science, from NIH grants to cuts in libraries and knowledge and literacy, crime dollars, volunteering, the spirit that defines the best of America and Vista in 1965, and Sarge Shriver, the Great Frontier, and that assault on AmeriCorps, $400 million just whacked under the guise of quote-unquote efficiency. By the way, our AmeriCorps members working on the recovery in Los Angeles, our AmeriCorps members working on high-dose tutoring in our public schools. Best to describe this as a Trump slump all across the United States. It's reflected in adjustments by every independent economist, by leading banks, by institutions. Across the board, we are projecting impacts because of the uncertainty that have led to a downgrade in our projections. And I'll get to the budget very briefly. Those downgrades include the disproportionate impacts in a state like California, the impacts on the ports, impacts that have been highlighted and reinforced by port directors in Long Beach, LA, certainly where 40% of goods movement comes through, but also in the smaller ports like San Francisco and Oakland. You've heard Gene Soroka and others lament about a 35% decline in volume. We've gone from 145% tariffs to maybe 80% and now 30. If you started at 30, it would have a jaw-dropping impact on the economic future of this state. And I bring up the 145, the 80, now 30, but to highlight the impacts that are disproportionate in California, not just as it relates to the trade with China, but the relationship and trade to Mexico and Canada. When you look at those three trading partners, imports and exports into the state of California, you can see the numeric $67 billion, 37% of that related to exports into those countries of our total exports, and 41% of our imports reflected in that trade between those three countries. The impact, of course, of the swings, the volatility, the uncertainty across the spectrum is it's chilled investment. Market swings, you can see just last month, feels like a year ago, it was just literally weeks ago, a $10 trillion swing in the markets. The markets may be up yesterday, down today. We'll see where they are tomorrow. That uncertainty is leading to uncertainty as it relates to business decisions and investments. You can see the impacts on the largest retailers and expectation that small businesses have laid, that their decisions that need to be made today as it relates to backpacks and school supplies and decisions that will be made in just a matter of months as it relates to Christmas supplies might be impacted by the indecision or the uncertainty, both and, coming from the White House. 30% tariff, 25% tariff, 10% tariffs, even as baselines, having a profound impact. But more importantly, the impact is disproportionate on our small businesses. And I say that as a guy who knows a thing or two about it. You don't have to impress upon me what P&L is, or seasonal purchasing. I am proud to have started a small business right out of college with a part-time employee, Pat Kelly, and grew that at peak to over 1,000 employees, 21 businesses. And I don't say that to impress any of you, but to impress upon you my passion for entrepreneurialism, my passion for people who put everything on the line for riches and new beginnings, small business men and women, and the anxiety, even in the best of times, that they feel. But how about the anxiety at the moment? Do I make the purchase in China with 30%, or will he change his mind in 2 weeks and it will be 20%? Do I hold back and just do my high margin purchases today and forget the low margin purchases? But what will that do in terms of my summer volume and revenue? Across the spectrum, the impacts are just being felt and haven't yet fully been felt. You can point to the inflation number and say, well, it's behind us now, please. The impacts of these tariffs have yet to be felt. The impacts, however, are being felt disproportionately in the fourth largest economy in the world that has so much goods volume and trade. And I'll remind you, not just so much goods volume and trade, 1 out of every 5 businesses in Southern California are directly or indirectly connected to that trade. So the impacts here are disproportionate. I talked about California as it relates to its dominance in so many different sectors. Another area of dominance as it relates to business starts. You can see here in the state of California since 2019 through September of last year, and the most modern, at least up-to-date numbers that we have, 1.16 billion new business starts, 2x. Texas businesses remain the backbone of our economy. 4.2 million businesses in the state of California, 7 million people employed. It's about 47.1% of our total employment. It's a point of pride, and the impact our small businesses are feeling is disproportionate. We are, as a consequence, pushing back. And we're not just standing by passively. We feel we have agency. We can shape the future. We can punch above our weight. And that's why, working with the legislature, we were proud to do an early action on a special session that fortified the Department of Justice, our AG's office, to provide additional resources so that we can move aggressively to defend our values and defend the state of California, defend our Constitution as it relates to issues large and small, from birthright citizenship to voting issues, obviously issues that are more contemporary along the lines I just suggested on the AmeriCorps cuts and notably on the issue of tariffs. On the issue of tourism, I should note, California dominates. We were $157.3 billion last year in total spend, which was record-breaking tourism just last year. The impacts of our trade, not just our tariffs, the impacts of rhetoric related to the world we're living in, the recklessness of that rhetoric in relationship to the trade and confidence, let alone trust in brand America, is, yes, unfortunately impacting America's #1 tourism destination, the state of California. Here's the latest numbers that came from Visit California, 11% decline in total number of total volume of international visitors. You can see highlighted here, Germany leading the decline, and obviously UK and Canada. I bring those three up because we haven't been passive in this respect either. We've been recently meeting with leaders in Germany. Up there, one of the slides with the German ambassador recently, the UK ambassador we met with consul generals all across the state of California representing Mexico, and the lower screen there with the Premier of British Columbia. We have been proactive in our engagement, proactive in making the point that California has an open hand, not a closed fist, that we are 2,000 miles away from Washington, D.C. We're 1 million miles away in terms of mindset in our approach. By the way, our mindset included a $5.2 million investment working with Visit California to invest in getting tourists back into California from Canada in particular. 1.8 million Canadians visited California last year. So we're trying to protect our economic power. Again, suing the Trump administration among many other critical issues. This lawsuit, though, being emphasized as the most important. You may have seen yesterday, we were able to provide the kind of specificity that was required of a request for an injunction that will be not only included today in the presentation that I'm about to make on the budget and its impacts as it relates to what's going on in Washington, D.C., on our revenue in particular, but also as it relates to the lawsuit itself that was filed that uses a lot of the data that we're providing you today in this budget presentation to back up that lawsuit. So let's jump right into the budget. When we last met in this room, we estimated we said it was in essence a balanced budget, $363 million. That was the estimate in the January presentation, all things being equal. Interestingly, since January, the presentation that I provided you had a revenue projection, and we were off. We were significantly off. The revenue that came in from January through April exceeded our expectation by $7.9 billion. The economy of California was humming. An additional $7.9 billion above our projections we were collecting. That has significantly changed since the actions of this administration. We now project on the basis of the work that's been done by not only our finance team, but those experts that we counsel and engage in an independent review of our estimates. We estimate that the impacts that I just laid out as it relates to what's going on in Washington, D.C., instead of seeing that increase in revenue through April that we were experiencing, again, $7.9 billion above, we're going to see an impact about a $16 billion downturn, not all in the next fiscal year, but fiscal year plus one. This goes into basically a 2-year process. Let's break it down so you can see where those dollars will decline. Unsurprisingly, anyone who's familiar with the state of California's budget and the volatility of the budget, reduction in capital gains being the most impacted. You'll see a $10 billion estimate in reduction in capital gains, and I'll give you some proof points of that in just a moment. You can see the impacts on income as it relates to wages, then the $3.5 billion in that space, income taxes, and then weaker corporate profits that will nerd about $2.5 billion less in expected revenue. This is, again, top line, $16 billion. revenue decline based upon where we thought we'd be just in January. So here's a slide I showed you in the January budget. And this is an important slide because I highlighted that we were getting back. And again, anyone familiar with California's budget, because of the progressive nature of our tax system, understands the volatility, understands the nature of the EKG chart that is here. And what we were basically trying to highlight in January is getting back to some normalcy. That sort of more traditional 5.1% on capital gains as a percentage of personal income. And that's the numeric that has a disproportionate impact, not only on our revenue, but also impacts that are external from us related to the markets themselves and how the markets have an outsized role in terms of impacting our capital gains. So we projected about a 5.6% numeric in January. Today, we're projecting a 4.4%, from 5.6% down to 4.4%. The out years, you saw on the last chart, 5.1. We're projecting that now down to 4.8 in the plus year budget. So that alone has a significant impact on our revenue and relates to the chart that I previously provided you, 10 billion of the 16 billion being impacted by capital gains. Here's just that chart that we often share, just showing you that revenue volatility. This is more broad than just capital gains, just showing you these peaks and valleys. And that, again, only reinforces the imperative of getting to 20%, not a 10% reserve, and making sure that the GAN limit is not included in the BSA and works against us. That's an ongoing reform that we need to pursue, and we need the voters to approve. So let's talk about the budget. Here we are, $321.9 billion budget, submitting to the legislature, $226.4 billion is general fund. We $15.7 billion in total reserves, and a shortfall that we're projecting on the revenue and expense side of $11.9 billion. I want to put that in perspective, that shortfall in perspective. It's about 5.8% of the general fund. So you can put it in perspective of previous years, significantly higher, going back to the Great Recession, another recession. You could see some of the numbers that previous governors have had to grapple with. So by relative years, this is pretty mild. And as a consequence, we are moving forward with making decisions that not only address the concerns this year related to the 11.9 billion, but mindful that we need to tighten things up into the out years as well. And thus the fiscal responsibility slide. Obviously, we need to plan for the long term, which is difficult, if the slides did not highlight that, in the best of times. But in a time of just extraordinary uncertainty, it is particularly challenging. And that's why we need to be particularly mindful of the world we're living in and what are the trend lines that define it. So here are the solutions. $5 billion on a freeze on our Medi-Cal expansion. We're not cutting or rolling back those that are enrolled in our Medi-Cal system. We're just capping it, particularly for those without documentation. We're the only state in the country, and many states have expanded health care under their Medicaid system, our Medi-Cal here in California system. No state has done more than the state of California. No state will continue to do more than the state of California by a long shot. And that's a point of pride. And it's a point of privilege to be governor that's been part of that effort. So we're going to freeze enrollment, which in the out years, budget year plus one, represents about $3.3 billion. And these solutions are budget year. I'm looking beyond the 3.3 represents budget year plus one. The monthly premiums, we believe that people should have some skin in the game as it relates to contributions. So we are looking to a monthly premium that would generate through that program, wouldn't go in effect till January 1st, 2027. This is my confirmation team. Again, I have no notes up here. And would, in the budget year plus one, represent about $2.1 billion. There's certain clinic payments that are related to the undock expansion that we cap. There's some overtime at IHSS. That's, and we'll cap it at 50 hours, which we think is reasonable, 50 hours of overtime. And there's some utilization as relates to prior authorization, some prescription drug utilization management. That represents about $200 million. On the revenue side of things, there's no new taxes, in sort of the vernacular that's often used, but there are some strategies as it relates to generating revenue into the general fund. You saw what we already did as it relates to the Medi-Cal alone. I think was highlighted was $3.4 billion on two funds that are sort of well known to all the folks in the front row here. There's about $150 million we're going to sweep, and about $450 million we're going to sweep. And then there's Prop 35 revenue for Medicaid base Medi-Cal base growth. It's about a $1.3 billion contribution to our challenge. So that is the bulk of the how we get to balance, with one additional caveat. We're going to do fund shift so we could keep our investments whole in CAL FIRE, which, as you know, we've doubled the number of CAL FIRE personnel roughly, and roughly doubled the budget in the last few years. I don't know what more evidence we need of the imperative and importance of maintaining that investment than what we just experienced in Southern California in January, and of course what we'll experience. It's fire season. Well, it's always fire season in California, but we're entering the peak of the fire season in the next number of months. The imperative of maintaining that investment. We think it's more appropriate that the impacts related to the burning of fossil fuels, which is what greenhouse gases in essence are, those impacts that come through the cap and trade program that are intended to be mitigated, that those impacts are having a direct result on the investments that we need to make, and historic investments that not only in personnel, but as you know, we just highlighted a C-130 Hercules, the second of 7 that will be coming into the CAL FIRE, the largest aerial firefighting fleet in the world, civilian fleet in the world. Those investments come through the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which we want to extend to 2045. That is a 20-year extension. In that extension, by the way, there is roughly $60 billion, 60, of tax cuts, rebates that will go back to taxpayers related to utility use, which is significant. And I'll highlight that because it deserves to be highlighted. And if I'm a taxpayer, I'm happy to hear about that $60 billion that will go back into people's pocket if we are successful getting that program extended. Let's extend the budget presentation a little bit. Prop 98, $137.8 billion. You can correct me at any time. Total investments under the Prop 98 framework. So last year, just to put it in perspective, our per pupil, per child, someone says, what's a pupil? I said, well, that's your kid. So we had some significant increases over the last decade that we highlighted last year. And the question is, are we seeing a decline in that this year or an increase? You can see here we're going to experience an increase in per child, per pupil investments, $25,176 for all funds. And then you could just see the 98 component on the other side of that chart, depending if you're looking this direction or that direction, left or the right. The COLA this year will be 2.3%. We had a January number, roughly 2.4%. It's an important number for our folks on the front lines. We're going to continue our unprecedented investments. Remember, we created a brand new grade, TK for all 4-year-olds by September 1st of the incoming year. This program will be fully implemented in this fiscal year. We're also fully committed to implementing, it's an additional $1.2 billion to reduce our staff ratio to 1 in 10, which is a big deal. That commitment remains whole. An additional $1.2 billion will be invested So it's high quality TK. So it's no longer K through 12 education in California. It is TK to 12 education in California. You can make that case, it's TK to 14. We'll get to that in a moment. We also are fully committed and have applied, as you call, first state in the nation. I know a lot of states are doing great work in this space, and it's wonderful to see. It's so important. We keep highlighting this. Some of you were up there with us in Chico at the farm at Chico State, highlighting the farm to school programs and the imperative importance, again, of quality, not just quantity and access, but no stigma, 2 free meals a day for every kid. That program continues. Here's a program that I'm deeply prideful of as well. So much attention was rightfully placed, the previous administration, previous governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger. There's a lot of credit for after-school programs. We've 10x'd that. We actually have delivered full implementation. 9 hours a day, before school, after, and summer school for TK to 6th grade. This is a big damn deal. Over $4 billion invested in this space. And again, it needs to be highlighted because I don't know many states that are doing this, but our state of mind is around getting this done. And you see that will get done, fully implemented over this year. Also something that's getting done, 4.6 billion reasons why it matters. Community schools, which people get confused by. We had a little pilot. We put a few bucks in 2019 on community schools. This is about providing, all your fancy neighbors, they may have all these bells and whistles, but what about at every public school? So now 2,400, almost 2,500 new schools have all those bells and whistles. Start to address the issues that are happening outside of the school facilities and making sure that we're providing not just healthy meals, but health care, wellness centers, not just for adolescent physical health, but mental health, high-dose tutoring, learning specialists, and a lot of support services to help families. So these community schools, it's a national, we think it's a national, what we're doing is a national model. There's a lot of states doing interesting things. We steal all their good ideas in the spirit of elevating everybody. But I really am grateful for the great work folks are doing in this space at the local level and expanding this space, $4.6 billion. And that progress continues. Here's also progress that needs to continue. This is interesting on a lot of levels. There's been a lot of conversations here in the legislature, and I want to applaud the work of this speaker in particular and many members of the legislature that have been champions of reading and literacy for many, many years. We've been proud of the work we've done for many, many years. I'll remind some of you that we invested an additional $6.8 billion. You wonder where all those CARES dollars went. The money we got from the feds. We flooded the zone with $6.8 billion of these grants to deal with some issues around learning recovery associated with the pandemic. That was sort of the baseline. And then we started to build out a broader literacy and reading strategy that included over $500 million for literacy coaches. And by the way, we have 833 schools now that are benefiting from these coaches that are being trained and organized in a very significant way. This year, after many years working with UCSF, best in class, we now have, as a dyslexic kid, the reason I have no notes, we have new screeners for every kindergarten, first grader, and second grader. It's going to happen this fall, finally, that addresses the anxieties around ESL and addresses a lot of the cultural competency concerns that we had expressed by advocates for many, many years. So that's fully going into effect. We are also rolling out our literacy roadmap, which is our detailed plan. This is part of a larger state literacy plan that we put out that includes these new networks and hubs, which will share best practices and be platforms for engaging in every region in the state. And we're including in this budget this year, because of the work of the speaker and the legislature, in expectation that I'll not only get that bill that they've been negotiating and debating on evidence-based reading, we're going to add it. This shows a little more intention. We're going to add $200 million to back that bill up, but we're also going to add language in the budget to make sure that it gets here. Not that we needed that. Leadership's there, but we work with leadership, and we just want to move that process forward quickly. There's going to be a lot more on literacy. That roadmap we're about to announce, its details, and we'll be talking about the progress we've been making. And dare I, at peril, because I know we're not nearly, I want to make this crystal clear, not nearly, well, we have a lot of work to do as it relates to closing gaps, equity gaps in particular. But I want to acknowledge progress. We were 48th in the nation in the NAEP scores, 48th in 8th grade reading, almost dead last in 2011. No state did better between 2011 and 2022 than your state of California in improving its scores. No other state came close. We had the fastest growth in reading proficiency of any other state in the country. Now we are, dare I say, about average. Now, the Urban Institute put out their own study that said we're a little above average because they included some demographic mix, but I don't even want to lay claim to that. We have a lot of work to do. But we made a lot of progress. And I make that point because some people just feel like, well, we can't make progress. That's not true. And by the way, with 4th grade reading, there were only 3 states in the last decade that made any progress. California is one of them. And I'll remind all of you, particularly those of you that tend to fall prey to misinformation, not disinformation, but misinformation, that California's reading scores and math scores substantially, not substantially, outperformed during COVID states like Texas, or excuse me, notably, a state like Florida. In fact, in Florida, in every single category. We had less learning loss in 4th grade and 8th grade reading and math than the state of Florida. I say that because you may not know that. And some of you may be immediately trying to stress test that. 3 out of 4 categories we outperform, in 1 category we tied. So that's my response to your inquiry. Proud of that, but we haven't come close to where we need to be, particularly as it relates to equity issue. That's the importance of that bill, importance of the work the legislature's doing, and I'm grateful for their work. Let's talk about CSU's UCs. We talked about the 12,700 patents, active patents, more than any other university system on planet Earth. That's just the UC system. The system engaged with the state a number of years ago in a 5-year compact that committed 5% increases a year. We were able to hold strong to that over a 2-year period, and then we're struggling now with some challenges. We had a 7.95% adjustment in the January budget. We're going to reduce that to 3%, so down to 3%. And I remind everyone the deferral is locked in. We are committed. The UC deferral is $240.8 million, 240 million, 0.8, and I think the CSU a little bit higher, $252.3 million deferral. That is sacrosanct. They'll get that 5% bump. Just want to remind everybody of that. But again, what we want in return, the whole idea of the compact was to create for the first time in state's history a system-wide goal in terms of graduation, to address some of the issues of equity in relationship to that, time to degree, dual enrollment, issues related to transfers, and most importantly, at least some of us, particularly those of us that have kids that are getting closer and closer to filling out applications to the UC-CSU, more California resident undergrads. So in return for these dollars, we have certain expectations, and we are fully committed to fulfilling our part of the deal. And we know our friends at the trustees and regional level are as well. Look, not everyone is going to go to a 4-year college, and that's okay. And that's why we're very proud to put the kind of energy we put in to the master plan that was designed in the 1960s. We put, over the last few years, similar amount of energy into creating the state's first master plan for career education, where we focus on skills. We focus not just on academic proficiencies, but skill-based mastery. What are you great at? And how do we value that as opposed to devalue that? 800 plus people worked on this plan, and is a deep point of pride. I don't know that there's a more comprehensive plan for career education in the country. Some of you were out there on the road with us. We were in a bunch of parts of the state, many different rural parts of the state in particular, talking about a career passport, which is an academic and skills passport, both and. This notion that you can have a thriving career without a college education is sacrosanct and is critical in a state deep pride with its UCs and CSUs as a conveyor belt for talent. The community colleges are as the backbone of that conveyor belt as well. And so the partnerships with the community college include this credit for service. And what is that about? If you're a police officer, if you were in the military, and you did all that basic training, you've developed an enormous amount of career and job-ready skills. If you want to plus that up, if you want to get a BS or BA, you want to plus it up, maybe get a little bit more support. Why do you have to do all those basic courses again when you've already spent years and years? And so this notion of credit for service is a big part of that. And that leads to our vets. The biggest beneficiaries, there's 140,000 retired military in the state of California. They will be a huge beneficiary of that effort and that program. And by the way, they deserve even more support. And that's why we're finally trying to reconcile in a tough budget year. We're going to make a down payment to exempt for our military families their retirement benefits from being taxed in the state of California. So we're finally moving that forward in this year's budget, something we've been talking about. We held the line despite some of the challenges in other parts of our budget. Speaking of that, I have a little bit of bias. My grandfather, Arthur Menzies, spent years and years in corregidors, prisoner of war. He came back, struggled, and ultimately, I've shared this before, but he took his life. He never came back the same. And so I'm deeply mindful of the challenges that veterans struggle with when they come back. And so I was very proud that we worked with members of the legislature, we worked with the public to get Proposition 1 passed. It includes $1 billion for our vets under the Mental Health Service Act reforms and the capital infusion of the $6.38 billion bond. $1 billion of that is set aside for our vets. And I say that because I want to highlight that, because just this week we highlighted other component parts of our behavioral health strategies. And I'll remind you that we are flooding the zone in this space. It is important, and I'll say it over and over and over again in an effort to try to get people to truly absorb that in 1959, California had a peak number of locked hospital beds. 1959, 37,000. Today, with a population that's twice the size, we have about 5,500. 37,000 to about 5,500. That's a problem statement. Prop 1 is about addressing that problem with the most significant investments throughout the state. Those little hashtags do represent broadly. Be generous with our designer. All the investments, 54 out of 58 counties are getting these investments, 124 projects, 214 facilities, 5,000, almost 5,100, I should have rounded up, residential treatment beds, money that has been distributed on projects that are shovel-ready, projects that have to be in contract within 90 days with land use reforms and zoning reforms attached to them that went through a stress test over the course of the last 12 months, the fastest distribution of funds and project identification in, I think, modern bond history. If I'm off, it's because I'm naive about what happened in the early part of the last century, but certainly in the last number of decades. 21,000, almost 22,000 outpatient treatment slots. About 80% of the $4.4 billion in this program, money out the door, more money coming out in the next few weeks. You can see some of the schematics of these projects. These are actual schematics of actual projects that are going to be built, some as early as later this year, in the calendar year. Many of them rolling out next year and the year after. New construction, campus-style settings, cottage settings, and the like. I'm very excited about it. Look, it's all about building faster, and it's about addressing the issue that impacts and more things in more ways on more days than any other issue in the state of California. And I'm not talking about Trump. I'm talking about our own ability to get out of our own way. We're as dumb as we want to be when it comes to the issue of housing. I just went from an education slide. We may want to take Econ 101, supply, demand. We're not producing enough supply to meet the demand. Constraints lead to price increases, affordability crisis, stress on working families and middle-class families, impacts on homelessness. All of that directly correlated. It's not complicated. We have done a lot in the last few years. I'm proud of it. 42 CEQA reform bills I've signed. That's unprecedented. Done a lot to create a new accountability unit. We're including homelessness in the housing accountability unit, and there's dozens and dozens of cities have gone into compliance, thousands and thousands of units that have been unlocked and housing that's been produced as a consequence of that effort. We prioritize state lands. We've looked at all our excess state lands. We're unlocking those surplus lands, and we've done a lot for renters as well, with one of the most significant comprehensive. I was talking to the governor of Washington State, who just signed a similar bill, a little bit different. I think he even was more expansive, of Washington, modeled substantially off California's bill as it relates to protecting renters and just cause evictions. We've done a lot, but we need to do more. And that's why I couldn't be more proud of Buffy Wicks and Senator Wiener. Thank you to Assemblywoman Wicks, and thank you to Senator Wiener. Thank you for their two bills. Let's go. It's time to accelerate urban infill. It's time to exempt them from CEQA. It's time to focus on judicial streamlining. It's time to get serious about this issue, period, full stop. And that's why language will be included in the budget to make this happen, to get this done. Enough. This is a crisis. If you care about your kids, you care about getting this done. This is the biggest opportunity to do something big and bold. And the only impediment is us. So we own this, and we have to own the response. And I just really applaud the two leaders for sticking with this issue over the course of many, many years. A lot of those bills that I signed in the previous slide were reflective of their good work. We also want to create a new housing and homeless agency and integrate homelessness and housing, back to my prior point. And we need to support a bond to address the issues of housing, yes, affordability, but also infrastructure, which is foundational in terms of being able to move to the degree we need to. So both those bills are top of my mind, on my mind, and reflected in not only this slide, but are reflected in the vernacular of Sacramento, the trailer bills in the budget. Let's talk a little bit about homelessness, and there's not too many other slides, and we'll get to any questions. We've cleared, look, I just highlight this because we need to do more, but we have done better. Over 16,000 encampments on state right-of-ways have been cleared. This is unprecedented. Every week, every single week, you're welcome to get a copy. I get an update from Caltrans of all the sites they clear. I told them, I don't believe you. I want to see them. They photograph them for me, and they submit 20, 30 pages every week. That's how I start my week, looking at these cleanup sites. We need to have that same kind of intentionality with every jurisdiction in the state of California. I mentioned incorrectly, I said Tulare. I don't know what I was thinking, but I meant Turlock 2 days ago. Eitan, I apologize. I pride myself, or was it you, Ashley? I pride myself, forgive me, on getting things accurate. They turned their back. They have turned their backs on all of us, frustrated with the issue of homelessness. And it's just a case study. I've talked about Huntington Beach being a case study on housing. And if you want to understand why the state has a housing crisis, just learn about the approach Huntington Beach has taken. Well, Turlock may be up there when it comes to the issue of homelessness. We asked them for a whopping $1. Back to skin in the game. Just at $1. And we'll give you hundreds of thousands of dollars to actually solve a problem. And they said, nope, not interested. Not interested in any of this. So it's just a reminder, it's just an example, adjacent example to encampments. The challenge that remains on this issue, it is not the state of California that remains the biggest impediment. The obstacle remains at the local level. And we have done everything to remove as many obstacles as possible. That's what the conservatorship reform was about. That's what Care Court was about. That's what all these zoning reforms and land use reforms are about. That's what's included in Home Key. Over 10,000 human beings in housing under our state model. Room Key got over 62,000 people off the streets. Unprecedented. Came with reforms. Time to delivering projects. Taxpayers mindful of their dollars. We provided those at unprecedented low costs in terms of creating those units under those creative programs. We need to see that same level of engagement in every part of the state, particularly as it relates to the issues of encampments, unsheltered homelessness. Now, I want to talk about that a little bit. There's no one, you don't see a sign saying mission accomplished. So, for the cynics, those people just are hardened by darkness and negativity. I'm very negative about the performance at the local level as it relates to unsheltered homeless, sure. But I want to just put it in perspective. We had a almost 52% increase. We were going through the charts on unsheltered homeless up till a few years ago. We have been just pounding every year. I know we have more to do. We're making progress. And this year, we're one of the few states in America that didn't see an increase in unsheltered population, 0.45%. Nation went up over 7%. By the way, on overall homelessness, we went up 3%. The nation went up at 18.13%. You could PolitiFact that. You had 44 other states had larger increases than California last year in unsheltered homelessness. That's not good enough. That's my long-winded point. Thus, the imperative on the model ordinances, thus the imperative on accountability and continuing, to the extent we can, driving reforms. And so I want to talk about driving reforms and accountability. We created an accountability website on behavioral health, housing, and homelessness. And I encourage everyone to go on this site. And by the way, it's exciting. At 9 o'clock today, we added, to the extent people get excited about this, we added 2 additional sections today on ERF, which is the encampment resolution grants. We call them encampment resolution funds for the vernacular of our finance team. How many people were actually served? This is the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars in addition to all the HAP money and in addition to everything else we've done. $750 million flooded the zone to focus on encampments. This is not about criminalizing. This is about humanizing. This is about cleaning up encampments and saving people's lives and improving the quality of life for everyone in return. $750 million. How are they doing? By county. Look it up. See how your county's doing. See how your neighborhood is doing. See how they're doing as it relates to their mobile crisis units that we've made eligible under Medicaid. One of the reasons Medicaid has gone through the roof. We can talk about that in the Q&A, all the other areas. But that's one of many. How many counties are actually using those Medicaid dollars, those Medi-Cal dollars? We finally have that up after 9 a.m. this morning. All these other areas are on SB 43, which is the conservatorship reform, the care court, housing element compliance. I'm losing even more of you when I get into RENA goals, but they're in there as well, all on this website, accountability.ca.gov. Proud of it. Also proud that we're starting to personalize government. We talk about step-by-step strategies, step-by-step plans to address vexing and challenging issues, career master plan being one of them, work we're doing on the compacts. We also believe in effective, efficient, and engaged democracy. I'll get to all 3 briefly. On efficiency, just on a highlight, we're really proud of the work we've done in partnership with some of the world's greatest companies that happen to be California, unsurprisingly, California companies. We've announced the most significant, and we have scrubbed this. There are a lot of interesting AI projects going on across the country, none on Gen AI at this scale that are more interesting than the number that we've been announcing recently in the state of California to be more efficient. We've also been aggressive, over 6,000 plus positions, and I'll show you a website to validate and stress test that work we're doing on printing, travel, workflows, IT modernization, our whole digital first, the Office of Digital Innovation, Office of Data and Innovation around data design, about humanizing workflows. We've been at this for years and years and years. We've saved the taxpayers over $2.5 billion in the last few years just with some of the more recent efforts, saving money, becoming more efficient, not doing things to people, doing things with people. A completely different approach than you're seeing with that four-letter word and the crew out of Washington, D.C. It's also about effectiveness. And I, at peril, my team said, do you really want to do this? Take that four-letter word that's currently 3, DMV. But I just thought, it's Harvard Business Review, after all, and they've been under assault, but I want to lift them up. DMV just got a recognition by the Harvard Business Review of their turnaround. I know. Your experience last week, your friend 2 months ago, you heard, I heard it too, and we get it. But they have made Steve Gordon done a good job, and I'm proud of him. And he's doing it because we give him the tools. We've got this thing called RFI2, which is just a fancy way of saying we're doing sandbox and iteration. We're changing our procurement in the state. It's game changer. The procurement protocols in the state have radically changed, and I'm really proud of that. It allows us to test new technologies in a sandbox, taking an iterative mindset, allowing us to do things the private sector traditionally does. And we're doing it and producing real results, particularly as it relates to wildfire. With Techno Silva, one of our partners that came through the RF2 process as it relates to predictive modeling and wildfire modeling, some of the early alert systems, one in particular that got recognized as Innovation of the Year by Time Magazine. Something would be nice to see recognized in the state of California, but I appreciate Time recognizing the work we've done on Alert SF as technology continues to aid in our efforts. And we're going to need more, but we are doing better in this space. So contracts are being renegotiated, constantly trying to address the issue of fraud. They're very mindful of that being an ongoing issue. And saw a 60 Minutes thing last weekend. You should check it out about the impacts around the globe on this issue. This is a huge issue, will be increasingly a major issue of focus for years and years to come. We must do more in this space. Civil service reform, we've done a lot. Again, not doing to people, but with people, meaning our public employee unions, the technology of firefighting I talked about, and a lot of partnerships, not just public-private, but also public-public partnerships, all on results.ca.gov. And this is the site. It's all here now, brand new, ready to go. You can scrutinize it. You can find a mistake. You can highlight it. You can maybe highlight something that is interesting and novel that you didn't know about. Here are all the kinds of things we've been working on, and from drought forecasting to housing permitting to just basic ways to make government smarter and work better, meet people where they are. Engaged. And that's the transition to engaged. I've been if you're like me, and just a few more slides, guys. If you're like me, you've been very concerned about the lack of civic engagement and the fact that people are talking down to each other or talking past people. And the question is, well, what the hell do we do about it? How do we move beyond the rhetoric and the rancor of the moment? And how do we allow, deliberative process that's not consumed by a special interest? You go to a town hall often and there's 23 people lined up saying essentially the same thing. You can get intimidated, and often your voice is not heard. So how do we create a platform for civic engagement in a civil way? And we have been scrubbing the globe, literally, to figure this out, and landed on a model in Taiwan, and actually brought the person who designed that model in Taiwan, which consistently is ranked as a democracy index as one of the most civically engaged in the world. We brought Audrey Tang to the office, and we designed this new civic platform called engage.ca.gov. And the first pilot launch, and I say pilot because we're going to roll this out across. I wish I could start over as governor again, because but we're here finally to do this on a myriad of issues. We've just launched it related to the wildfires. We call it digital democracy tool. And it's about sort of the public determining for themselves what they want to engage in, what are the topics, how people can engage in a deliberative process, and how they can platform that engagement in a way that they know their voices are heard, and there's a feedback loop. We have 7,800 people that have engaged in our first in the nation digital platform in Los Angeles, specific to the wildfire recovery, the distinction between Palisades and Altadena, the cultural competency in relationship to both that is highlighted often when you visit, particularly Altadena. Don't forget, we're a very different community than our friends and neighbors in the Palisades. And so that ability to differentiate a community-led process for rebuilding, and it's not just rebuilding LA, it's rebuilding trust. And so I'm really proud of that, and I hope you'll take a look at that. But also, we hope you'll join us on our journey as we roll it out for many other civic causes, and we'll be announcing shortly some new ideas in that respect. I want to thank Amy Tong as well for her great work, and all the team at ODI for making that real, working with Audrey and others, the Berggruen Institute, and our former California Justice. We are blessed that the Carnegie Foundation joined this effort as well. I'm going to get in trouble because there's 5 or 6 other foundations that have joined, but this is a very exciting thing. Little sobriety here, LA recovery. Just briefly, because I'd be remiss. This is our morning meetings. This is our weekly visits. Be down there again, I think, tomorrow and Friday. We went through that debris removal for hazardous debris waste at record pace. I want to thank the Trump administration, thank Lee Zeldin and the EPA for their partnership in that first phase. We're in that same mindset and process to get the phase 2 debris removal done. And we're moving not just mountains, you can see the equivalent of 100 Eiffel Towers. And now we're in the next phase as we finish that phase, and that is in the permitting phase. And I just highlight this because I think it deserves to be highlighted. Just a few months after one of the most devastating wildfires in U.S. history, people are starting to rebuild. Permits are starting to be distributed. Both L.A. City and L.A. County, dozens of permits have now been provided. People are actually starting to construct homes. Now, that pace is not nearly where it needs to be. I'm not naive about that. We need to significantly, exponentially increase that pace. But it's important because we're at a pace of recovery that we've never seen in California history. No other fire, no other recovery efforts move this quickly. It's not perfect. No one's naive. Issues continue to boil to the surface. That's the work we have to do to triage and iterate every day. That's why we're doing engage.ca.gov. What are the top priorities in terms of building back, dare I say, better, making sure that we're more fire resilient, making sure that our emergency systems are more redundant across the spectrum, making sure that building materials and designs are more efficiently procured, and how we deal with what will inevitably be an overwhelmed local city and county planning department. And that's why we just worked to provide the first AI tool for permitting and plan check and pre-approval in our state's history, and brought that into LA, announced that with the mayor, and members of the county board of supervisors did the same in the county. We've also been moving heaven and earth to the extent we can to help with the rebuild, 21 executive orders and counting. You can see across the spectrum, I won't burden you, small business support, law enforcement, providing ongoing support to just be more efficient, effective, including mortgage relief. I want to thank members of the Board of Supervisors, well, not only the Board of Supervisors and the City Council and the Mayor, but members of the Assembly and the Senate for their incredible support. They provided $2.5 billion in that early action. And that $2.5 billion, by the way, led to early action, as an example, $171 million, specifically wildfire prevention, part of a $2.5 billion overall investment just in the last number of years. Unprecedented in California system. We have 10x'd our investments in vegetation and forest management, highlighted in record-breaking number of acres treated and 1.9 million in 2021, 2023. I say this in terms of mindset and prevention. And part of that $2.5 billion, again, was for conservancies, $171 million that went to make sure that we're dealing with debris removal in Santa Monica Mountains and elsewhere in anticipation of this summer and winter and fall, or fall and winter. This is a map. I just think this is an important map. We created this a few years ago. I keep offering this to my friends in Congress. So my friends on the other side of the aisle, you may want to take a look at the map before you take a look at your staff's tweet saying we're not doing anything on forest and vegetation management. 2,200 projects underway or completed. And here's an interactive map. We got a task force, a group that's attached to this. I just attached another executive order, fast tracking and addressing the green tape on getting these projects moving. And it's really paying dividends. And so this is an interactive map, available, transparent way where you can see, and those are actual projects all across the state of California. So we are doing more and doing our part. This is why it's so important that we put that $1.7 billion in the Greenhouse Fund as it relates to protecting these resources going forward. I think there's cause and effect. I think it's exactly where that budget belongs. Let's just briefly talk about one final thing. I'm mindful about the vulnerability. I began with vulnerability. I want to end with vulnerability, but I also want to end with agency. We're not victims. We're not bystanders. We can shape the future. And so this notion of having a vision is important. Vision is critical. And this vision has been laid out over the course of the last 3 years. And I want to thank again the legislature. Thank Mark McGuire and others, Mike, and his team, folks at the Pro Tem's office and the Speaker's office for their commitment over the last number of years, not just in their two new roles as Speaker and the Pro Tem, but as leaders in their own right as members of both bodies. They support an effort, $287 million effort, to design an economic blueprint that was bottom-up, back in the spirit of community-led economic vision. 13 homegrown plans, $287 million. Every region got a $5 million planning grant. They spent years developing a platform of engagement, over 10,000 people engaged in that deliberation in every region of the state. In the process, they were afforded early action grants if they had projects that were promising. We put out $39 million so they can move on that in the middle of the process of developing the plans. And we just provided each one $14 million of additional resources. This is the first plan that's actually funded in real time and supported with additional funds moving forward, including in this year's budget. I guess that's the long point I wanted to make. And it includes everybody. And some of you have been on that journey with me. And I think we've done 8 or 9 events on this in 8 or 9 different counties, almost exclusively with the exception of LA, in rural parts of the state, and really highlighting the remarkable contribution of our ag community, farmers, ranchers, and the like. And they're a big part of that economic blueprint, and I just think it's important that we remind folks of that. So, I thought I'd end with this slide because I love to say the future happens here first, where America's coming attraction, opportunities, challenges, many opportunities, many challenges. I'll close on the budget presentation by making the obvious point. The challenge that we face this year, and the challenge we will face for many years, is on growth of our Medicaid system, Medi-Cal. You face it in other areas as well, but the issue around Medicaid, Medi-Cal, it's a $179 billion budget this year. Not insignificant. That's all in, federal, not just general fund support. $179 billion. 5.3% of that is the undock expansion. 5.3%. That's part of it. But those that just want to run with headlines about that, I think miss what should be considered, which is the utilization rates across the spectrum are up. You saw, some of you may have even written about it, the supplementals that went out in many other states that don't have the expansive policies that California have. Pennsylvania was one of them, Colorado, Indiana, you can look those up. Significant cost pressures in their Medicaid system as well. I highlight that because it's not unique to California. And so we have to address that, and we have to be honest about it. Our approach was not to kick people off and not to roll back the expansion, but to level set on what we can do and what we can't do. And so there are 5 or 6 actions we're taking. I highlighted 3 or 4 of them. There are a few others that we're taking where we have to tighten things up. Now, legislature may have different ideas. and I look forward to engaging the legislature. But I made a commitment to people, and by the way, it was one of the most transparent commitments anyone that's ever followed me. When I was mayor of San Francisco, I became the first mayor in the United States of America. I promoted this and I promised this as a member of the County Board of Supervisors. I said, when I'm mayor, my commitment to the people of San Francisco is to become the first state in the United States of America with universal health care, regardless of pre-existing conditions, regardless of your ability to pay, and regardless of your immigration status. We delivered on that. Healthy SF was formed. When I ran for office as lieutenant governor, I said, that's my resolve, my commitment. It's my value. It's what I believe, I hold dear. I believe it's a universal right. And I have for 6 years championed that. Not on the receiving end of that. I've championed it, working with remarkable leaders. Senator Durazo and many, many others. Rambla, many have been just extraordinary partners and champions in this space. This is a tough budget in that respect. So I've been very prideful of the expansions and the progress we've made. But you have to level set with folks. The utilization, we now have 1.6 million people just on the NDOC side. There's about 10.7% of the total, about 14.9 million people that receive Medi-Cal in the state. Significantly larger number than we anticipated. But again, so is the case with the caseload broadly. You're seeing utilization numbers that are significantly greater than projections in state after state, again, not just the state of California. So we're offering this approach. Legislature will have their approach. But one thing we can't is approach a balanced budget unless we address the costs of Medicaid or Medi-Cal in this state. And so we're going to need to do that in partnership. That's the spirit to which always I submit this budget. Humility, gratitude to all of you, particularly the front rows here, the finance team, to these two that need a vacation and some rest, Erica and Joe. Thank you for your fortitude and your aptitude, and thank you for your commitment to this cause of trying to strike the right balance and to promote what we hope is a peaceful exercise of deliberation with our friends and colleagues in the legislature as we try to balance priorities and balance the realities that I began with, and that is with the uncertainties. In anticipation of your question, yes, we anticipate cuts from the federal government. Those were not anticipated in this budget. And so we will be tasked with making decisions in a very challenging and vexing time, perhaps the most challenging and vexing we've had in some time. And that's why I hope we do it in the spirit that has defined the last 6 budget negotiations. And so that is the presentation and preview of the conversations to come over the course of the next 30 plus days here in our state capital. With that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Governor. Ashley Zavala with KCRA 3. And speaking of the federal government, my question is in that space. But first, let's start with the fact that this is your second to last budget presentation as governor of California. And the first budget that you ever worked out with the legislature was about $208 billion. And what you've presented today represents a $114 billion increase from that first budget that you set. And budget watchers, including the Legislative Analyst's Office, warned that spending could be unsustainable. And even a couple of years ago, the LAO suggested that a reduction in spending could help offset future revenue losses. So with what you presented today and the budget problems you've laid out, I mean, is any of this self-inflicted or is the uncertainty entirely about President Donald Trump?
Well, we went from a $3 billion trillion dollar economy a few years ago to a $4.1 trillion economy. This nation state has grown, and as a consequence, we've grown into a different approach in terms of our investments. We're also trying to reconcile a lot of challenges we faced. So no, I'm very proud of the work we've done creating a brand new grade, TK for All. I'm very proud of the work we've done to be the nation's leader as it relates to food insecurity and addressing that as it relates to 2 free meals in our public schools I'm very proud of the work we've done on after school and summer school for all and the importance that we've placed on that, including high-dose tutoring and reading specialists and addressing some of the gaps as it relates to literacy. I'm very proud of the work we have done on forest and vegetation management and the critical and essential nature of that work to protecting our communities. I'm very proud of the fact we protected our communities with unprecedented investments into vertical prosecution grants and supporting local law enforcement agencies, more accountability, more transparency, addressing the issues of retail, theft, and quality of life crimes. I'm proud of the investments we're making in behavioral health, and I think they're long overdue and important. I'm proud of a lot of the work we've done in child care, and while I wanted to do more in this year's budget, we're going to have to hold the line, at least as it relates to this budget, and we'll see where the legislature comes back. And proud of the work we've done to address some of the gaps with the Department of Developmental Disabilities. The DDS often is overlooked in a lot of our conversations. Proud of those investments and proud to have taken inspiration from other states doing similar investments, but not at the scale and scope of the state. We submitted a balanced budget, as I've done every single year. We submitted a balanced budget not only to address $11.9 billion gap this year, but substantially address those out years, as you suggest. There's a delta. You referenced the Legislative Analyst Office of about $2.3 billion. The Legislative Analyst Office actually projects, with the big three revenue, 0.6% delta, $2.3 billion more in revenue than we're projecting. There's a difference of opinion. You're right, there often is with the LAO. They're projecting more revenue than we are in this budget. They're projecting $18.4 billion more revenue in the out years. So we're addressing that difference, and there is ongoing difference in that respect. We're also addressing some cost drivers that are not unique, as I say, to the state of California. So we're addressing those in the budget this year, and we look forward to addressing those out-year concerns. Proud of the economic growth, proud of the economic output in the state, and proud that we continue to balance our budgets, pay down long-term obligations. There was a slide on that. You saw in January. You've seen it in my previous presentations. Unfunded liabilities, we continue to pay those down. In this budget, that's reflected as well. And the reserves, we're not asking for any additional reserve, $7.1 billion. That was approved last year as part of that 2-year budget deal. We're still using the $7.1 billion and trying to hold that line.
Antonio Ray Harvey, California Black Media Governor. This might be a concern for the California Commission of Aging. By 2030, the California population for 65 and older will increase to 2 million, and 22% by 2040. Did say, budget for Medicaid is significant, but with people struggling and Social Security, cut, and this population is growing bigger. What options that or a message that you have for this population to ensure that this $5 billion rollback won't affect them, or is there other options?
Well, two things. One, I never suggested anything was insignificant as it relates to issues related to Medicaid. I referenced a 5.8 or so percent deficit relative to prior deficits and put that in perspective in terms of the totality of the challenge we face. And again, it's not unique. You see this in it seems like every 2-3 years. Feast, famine, feast, famine. It's the nature of the progressive tax system. We can get in a deep conversation about that, the merits and demerits about progressive taxes. We have the most progressive tax rates in the country. We can live in a state with the most regressive tax rates in America. You can just look, Exhibit A and B, Texas and Florida. By the way, Texas is a taker state. They received $71.1 billion more from the federal government than received. California donated to the federal government $83.1 billion more than we received from the federal government. That's 2023. I'm waiting for the 2024 numbers. We created a master plan to address the issue of our aging and graying population. We spent years developing that plan. We think it's a nation-leading plan, to your question, around allowing our seniors to age in dignity and age in place. Ashley's question, in many respects, your question is reflected in her observation that you have demographic challenges and you have to start to invest in architecting strategies and solutions. to allow people to age in dignity and age in place. It's not just providing the facilities, providing the workforce, which is a huge part of the Medicaid budget, the Medi-Cal budget. By the way, not reflected in my Prop 1 slide is a $1.4 billion investment in Proposition 1 on workforce development. Medicare is the primary driver of the support and costs for seniors, but not exclusively. There's some Medicaid dollars. So we're doing our best to try to substantially hold the line in terms of our adult services and senior service budget. That's not significantly impacted. As it relates to our expansion population, there are some adjustments for seniors, for the undocked population, that we are trying to right size on the basis of the budgetary constraints. And that's the proposal we're making. And to the extent the legislature has a different approach, we'll not only be mindful of their different approach, we'll be very receptive to strategies that ultimately get us to the balanced budget. But I'm very proud of the vision statement and the fact that on that master plan for aging, we have substantially made the investments we promoted in it, including on Alzheimer's and dementia care, working with former First Lady Maria Shriver. That was a separate plan that, to me, is a component part of that larger master plan. So I reflect some consideration in the response to the plan we put out. And on a number of occasions, we've updated the public on our performance to that plan. So you can see the actual progress we've made and the improvements that we've made in this space as well. But this budget holds the line on most of the adult and senior service programs. There are tweaks, and I know sometimes people see $1 million or $10 million and say it's the most catastrophic, but they're not fundamental shifts in terms of those investments outside of some of the cuts that we're proposing as it relates to the Medicaid expansion.
Governor, your office colleague Trump $16 billion. We know based on the action that was already taken, the solution is previously adopted, the combined with the new deficit. We're looking at about $40 billion in solutions California had to come up with for the 25. So I know you said you were proud of the programs that California has adopted, but can you address the reality of this as a spending problem because of big ticket?
Well, it absolutely is in the plus one budget, absolutely. So I referenced the $7.9 billion of revenue above projection and the fact we're moving in this direction. It substantially could have covered up any shortfall in the fiscal year, this current fiscal year. We could call it a day and be irresponsible. But that would not address, and I appreciate your question because it offers an opportunity to expand, and for some perhaps even clarify. In that out year, you're absolutely right. We've got a spending problem, and that's why we need to make these adjustments in the Medicaid budget. And that's why we have to be a little stubborn about it. And that's why I'm proposing them. And that's why this budget reflects a significant reduction in that plus one shortfall and knocks out vast majority of your estimate, which is not our estimate of the shortfall. So we are not just balancing for the new fiscal year, $11.9 billion, but we are substantially addressing fiscal year plus one. Well, we're putting $1.3 billion of money that is for Medi-Cal into base rates. And we think that is absolutely consistent with not only the rules that have been established with the federal government, the waivers we've received under the MCO tax pursuant to requests we made, including recent waivers that I personally participated in with Assistant Secretary of HSS, but also as it relates to the initiative that you're referring to. Well, Prop 36, as you know, is an unfunded mandate. That said, the budget under Prop 47, the irony for some, Prop 47, in which they decry and criticize, is the source of those funds. Prop 47, we project a $91.5 million savings pursuant to Proposition 47, of which in 27-28, the multi-year, that number will reduce down to $27.1 million. In order for the proponents of Proposition 36 to receive those dollars, so that fund will be depleted by, what's that, 68 million, am I right? Dollars over the multi-year. So that's a source of funds under Prop 36. There's another impact, and you'll see it in the CDCR budget. As you know, we've closed down 3 prisons in the last few years in order to save money and be more efficient. We've shut down 42 housing units at 11 different facilities, and we've made other reductions beyond just closing prisons. By the way, we're proposing an additional October of 2026 or 7? 2026 to shut down an additional prison in this budget. But there are impacts because of Prop 36 to the CDCR population costs, just like there are costs that the voters required under Prop 35. Billions and billions of dollars of Medicaid costs because of Prop 35. There are tens of millions, eventually hundreds of millions of dollars of costs that will be borne in probation and in corrections. And the correction data is hard right now because 36 is in its infancy, so it's hard to figure out exactly the census population. So here's the way it looks a little bit. We're seeing a significant, we've dropped from 175,000 at peak prison population down to about 90-ish. We're significantly seeing, we kept seeing that go like this. 36 is going to change that a little bit. We just don't know how much, but that uncertainty has kind of paused some things. And as a consequence, we expect in a couple of years, some of those numbers to go back up and then to start to decline again. So that will be borne in CDCR's budget. So we are funding that. Probation is feeling the stress. Judicial Council are feeling a little stress. And to the extent that they want to stress their theory of the case, that this was about retail theft, maybe it's about drug possession more, they'll have the benefit of that $68 billion over the next few years by taking money away from similar programs under Prop 47.
Hi, Governor Rachel Blue from Politico. Right now the federal government is trying to defund Planned Parenthood. Your budget here takes away their Prop 56 money for family planning, back their Prop 35 money for family planning. Planned Parenthood says that this is like a third of their budget that you're defunding. Do you have any concerns, in a state like you always say, about access for patients to family planning and abortion care?
Well, we enhanced the budget by over $200 million. I passed some of the most progressive policies as it relates to family planning and reproductive freedom of any state in America. We also lead, and I was proud to lead the effort, to lead a reproductive freedom alliance with other governors across the state. As it relates to Prop 56, when I got here, as you may know, that was not funded, the Prop 56. I established a new precedent to backfill the Prop 56 dollars. Prop 56, for some of you may recall, was the tobacco dollars. As tobacco consumption declines, the revenue was declining. I was backfilling that. Because of Prop 35 and the fact that it is burdened over the next 2 fiscal years by $4.6 billion, it's increased the budget deficit. We are trying to figure out ways of offsetting that. And so our ability to backfill the Prop 56 was one of those areas. And then we have some creativity on on the question that Taryn was asking. So we're able to sort of balance about $2 billion of that. But I am mindful of where we might be with the Trump administration and look forward to working with the legislature in the spirit of your question over the course of the next month to understand more fully where the feds will be, and absolutely am committed to any adjustments that we can make in partnership with the legislature to address those anxieties in the spirit of our support that has historically been placed, but the burdens that have been placed on us by Prop 35, by these unfunded initiatives, have created the stress, among many other stresses, that challenge us further beyond just Donald Trump and the uncertainty on the revenue side. Look, it's I made the point. I'd go back to my comments when I closed. It's been a point of pride, the work we've done on healthcare expansion. I didn't even talk about CalAIM and everything else we've done in this space. It's just no other state in the country does more. I was just reading. You may have seen it. I may even have it. It's interesting. There's if we could put this slide up on Texas, it's just interesting. I just think it's interesting. Texas hospitals are spending billions and billions of dollars now directly. They're starting to analyze the cost for undoc healthcare. You pay the price either way. We have universal healthcare in this country. It's called universal sick care in the emergency rooms. Taxpayers pay it. We believe in healthcare and wellness, a different approach. They also, by the way, have the highest uninsured rate in the country. We're among the lowest, about 10.4%, if my recollection serves me. Again, stress test that. So I'm making the point they're making, to make the point I was making, that I don't want to be in this position, but we are in this position. And instead of rolling back the program, meaning cutting people off for basic care, we have to adjust the comprehensive nature of the care, some dental adjustments, et cetera. I'd rather hold the line, and this was the approach. And good people have different ideas, and I look forward to their ideas. And this is, you guys know this very well. This is a very iterative process. The May revise to the final budget. It's a two-way conversation, and we work with the caucuses very closely, and we work with the Latino caucus very closely on this expansion in the first place. And I can assure you, I'll look forward to continuing that engagement on this. I've been always a hard-headed pragmatist. I'm not an ideologue. I'm open argument, interested in evidence. You could have said that when I did Care Not Cash as a county supervisor. You could have said that when I was balancing budgets as mayor. Could have said that when I expanded our police department as mayor of San Francisco and as the first mayor to actually reach the statutory requirement under the city charter in minimum staffing. So I've been accused of being a pragmatist for 20 plus years. And I think I'm being accused of that again. When it comes to quality of life, when it comes to, I did the first sit-lie ordinance in San Francisco. I did a aggressive panhandling ordinance. I've been at this a long time, and so it's remarkably consistent in that respect. I'm just for accountability, and I think the struggle on housing and the struggle on homelessness is that we got to get our own damn way, and so we're just driving much more accountability, and that's really, I think, the tonal change more than anything else. I think we also believe in balancing budgets. We've always balanced budgets. Got to balance them. And I think we're trying to be responsible in terms of how we're doing it. And we're doing more than anyone else. We'll continue to do more than anyone else. But I think this is the best path of the past that and I can assure you the stuff you have not seen, because I'm not promoting it, a little darker paths than the ones we're on, but it's not fundamentally a shift. Well, on that point, you saw 239 million reasons. There is a proof point to that, over 16,000 people impacted as it relates to, on your question, sir, on seniors, a program that Kristi Noem attacked, that California continues to fund, including in this year's budget, to offset the burdens for those that are blind and disabled that are otherwise not eligible without documentation for Social Security. The Homeland Security director sent a missive attaching her first review of that program, state-funded program, through the lens of LA County. So the answer to your question is, yes, I anticipate more of that kind of action moving forward. To the first part of your question, it's difficult to make a determination of exactly the scale and scope of the cuts that may or may not be occurring to pay for tax cuts to billionaires and millionaires that aren't even asking for them. That will burden and saddle our kids for generations and further weaken America's standing. So they have to offset those cuts without providing calamitous damage to the economy of this country, particularly as it relates to the budget, which they don't balance, we do. So the work requirements under Medicaid, we're assessing exactly what that may or may not mean in terms of the impacts in the state. As it relates to their authority to take state funds for our populations, whether they're here with documentation or without, that's legally questionable. So we'll also assert ourselves in the courts, as we have in the past, and as we've successfully done in the past in the previous Trump 1.0 administration and moving forward. So that's the tack we take. We express a multifaceted strategy of how we would approach that. But I think it's really important in the context of the previous three questions that all of that needs to be considered by the legislature in the next few weeks. If you don't like these proposals, we may be in a very different place in 6 weeks, in 9 weeks. And I think we should be cautious about immediately eliminating consideration of X, Y, and Z until we see the totality of the challenges as they present themselves, particularly as it relates to the CR at the federal level and other actions that the Trump administration may take.
You said you're not putting medical. Can you explain how that people can cut? Any message to the Latino community California is abandoning them during this crisis?
Well, no state in the country has done more for the Latino community in terms of expanding programs. No state will continue to do more. And by the way, I'm proud of the work we've done in that space, as I noted earlier, and the fact that we've championed a lot of those programs. We're not cutting anybody off from basic services, but we are asking for something we ask all taxpayers of California. By the way, many folks are taxpayers, over $8.5 billion a year in taxes we collect from people without documentation in the state. One last recent estimate. Under Covered California, we have deep subsidies that are substantially higher than the $100 contribution we're requesting. It's one way I would respond. I would like people to consider that for the healthcare. As it relates to our expansion, it exists nowhere else in the United States of America and continues, even with these modest adjustments, to continue nowhere else in America at the scope and scale that they do here for 1.6 million people. But we have to make adjustments in order to balance the budget. And that's the challenge and burden that's placed upon states, and so the burden and challenge that's placed upon us. And then I'll extend one final thing. Deep consideration if there's alternative strategies. The legislature can identify ongoing funding to balance the budget, not just this year, but to substantially address Taryn's question about the out year. Then I'm all in, and I would be more than open and willing to consider those alternative proposals if they service more people and attract more support from their colleagues in the legislature and the public.
Karen Bass has a funding request. And you also have a $40 billion request with Congress. What are you willing to do when it comes to funding for LA's rebuild?
Well, we remind you the $2.5 billion of early action we took. Hundreds and hundreds of millions, over $1 billion remains in that fund to yet to be expended. You can go back through those slides and see specifically what we've done for LA, which is quick, assertive action, aggressive action across the spectrum of supports, time value of recovery, and continue to be resourceful, not just provide resources. As it relates to direct contributions, I've been very clear with the mayor and the county that the state's not in that position to write a check above and beyond where we are today. That's why I put out a detailed plan a number of months ago requesting over $39 billion to the federal government, which is the money that the city and county will need in order to recover. And so that's where we believe our energy should flow, and has. I have acknowledged, and some of you were there when we announced the second C-130 Hercules. We acknowledged the incredible support that we received from a Republican member of Congress, Calvert, who helped us from the Pentagon, get support from the Pentagon to get that C-130. I also acknowledged his work in a bipartisan way to help us with his colleagues to secure funds for disaster recovery in LA. He was successful in getting every one of his Republican colleagues to sign a letter, a congressional letter, Democrats and Republicans, all rowing in the same direction, requesting that disaster aid for LA. That's the spirit we're taking in terms of our conversations in Washington, D.C., members of Congress in both houses. And I'm grateful that we're in the position we're in, but mindful that those decisions will be made in a very short period of time. But that's where those resources are for the city and county of LA. And I'll just conclude on that. Of that $2.5 billion I mentioned, well over $1 billion hasn't been sourced. What I've been clear about with the city and county is the money is reimbursed on the basis of what will otherwise be reimbursed by the federal government. When you're requesting things that have nothing to do with disaster recovery, that's a non-starter. And I reference some you've highlighted, I don't need to highlight, examples of requests from the city and county that were not related to disaster recovery. And this state is not in a position, never have been, even in other times, to address those requests, particularly at this time, but even in times prior, not in that position. Thanks.
Governor, starting with Cal Matters, projected cuts, across the board, right? Most only two Medi-Cal, but also some to public universities as well. But why are you committed to expanding the film tax credit program? When there are concerns that families statewide would have to pay more in healthcare premiums, and just now you said, right, requesting more funding not related to disaster recovery would be a quote non-starter.
Well, because I want to get the economy moving again. Revenue doesn't come from trees, doesn't come from printing presses. It comes from hardworking people that make big bets and sacrifice blood, sweat, and tears, go out and create opportunities, create jobs. I'm really proud of the work that folks do and the trades, the work that folks do on the line every single day to entertain and to promote, creativity and culture around the world. I'm really proud of California's leadership as it relates to film and filmmaking, pre and post production. It's on life support. LA County and LA City are struggling in their economic recovery. One of its principal economic drivers that benefits a large group of people is film and filmmaking, and we have to be more competitive. And so that's why I think it's critical that we make those investments. I also think it's critical that President Trump makes the investments. I applaud President Trump for recognizing that we're losing a lot of films to foreign countries. And I hope he steps up. You saw in the New York Times, I appreciate New York Times highlighting our request of $7.5 billion in a film tax credit that would address our competitiveness globally, which could also support not just our state, but the state of the industry throughout the United States. But the impacts in California are legendary, and we need to step things up. And this is all part and parcel of economic recovery, economic growth. And with economic recovery, economic growth comes more sustainability, more investment, more capital, more ability to address all of those larger issues that you highlighted in the frame of your question.
Governor Brent Stover here at State Affairs. At a level in terms of there, do you expect the legislature to need to come back several months from now and make much more substantial than normal changes after this?
I don't know. Is it, we just really, we're just dealing with unprecedented assault on rule of law, democratic institutions, our growth engines. The reason California is the fourth largest economy in the world is we had a formula for success. We talk about that conveyor belt for talent, CSU, UCs, and the commitment I'm making on the deferrals and the compact itself, the fact that we're reducing that January cut of 7.95% down to a more modest and manageable number. It's because we value those institutions. I value National Institute of Health and National Science Foundation, our labs. We referenced that 18% of global GDP in the R&D space. It's all part and parcel of why California is able to have robust budgets and enjoys so much robust revenue and unprecedented investments that we continue to make even today. But look, they've got a big math problem, and they've dug themselves into a hole because they want to dig this country into a hole in terms of debt and deficit. And I think it's reckless, these tax cuts to billionaires. And again, vast majority I run into never even ask for them, don't even want them. They sure as hell don't need them. And so they have to pay for it, or at least appear to pay for it. They won't. And they sure as hell don't pay for themselves. Let's disabuse ourselves of that stale talking point. And so, these cuts could be pretty steep. But we saw with Doge, that $2 trillion fizzled. Doge has been a complete failure. I don't even think they got to 160 billion. And they should look at what Al Gore did with Reinvent Government on a $1.4 trillion budget. He found $400 billion in savings and reduced the workforce by 400,000. But he didn't assault the values of our country in doing it. They haven't even come close to that with Doge. So I don't really trust their math or their assertions or what they promote or they promise. So put on our seatbelts is, I guess, to answer your question. And, we'll respond to what happens, but we've got to prepare for it. And that's, again, why I keep saying, as a legislature, we've got to act. Got to act. got to get our own house in order. We've got to deal with our growth and spending. It's not just Medicaid, a number of other things. It's not just a revenue problem, to your point. It is a revenue issue in the short term, certainly. But in the multi-year, we have to address those cost pressures, and we have to be honest about them, and we can't delay. I would answer my question by referring to what I just said.
Well, I'm curious if the White House has responded at all to this, or how you anticipate.
It's been a few weeks, but look, I'm not blaming the president for the deficit. Someone else may be. You might be. That's not what I'm doing. I'm directly attaching estimated $16 billion of revenue loss to the actions of this administration.
How is that not blaming?
Well, because it impacts. It's not to. It doesn't express the totality of the budget challenge. So by definition, I'm not expressing that that's the reason we're in the position. I'm saying in the short run, we had a $7.9 billion increase above projections, and that came to a screeching halt shortly after Liberation Day, and it's significantly impacted our economic projections. And it's not just as it relates to GDP growth, unemployment, but also inflationary pressures that have forced us to adjust our budget. And as a consequence, it will impact us by $16 billion. But I'm saying we have that issue on the revenue side, and we have an expense issue. And that expresses itself in the multi-years even more acutely than in the short run. But I certainly am attaching those revenue concerns directly to the activities of the administration, unquestionable, but not the totality of the deficit.
And they haven't responded to you at all.
No.
Governor, the current GOP House proposal is wants to penalize the states like California that continue to cover immigrants without legal authorization. And so they are saying that there's going to be a cut of 10 percentage points. So are you willing to continue covering those who are currently enrolled, even if that means a bit of 10%? And also, if so, how do we cover that?
Yeah.
Given that
Well, you got to find. I mean, again, it's hard to speculate on where these cuts are going. Are they going to find $880 million of cuts in the Medicaid system? What would that impact? How would that look? Where cuts are they actually going to attach there? Are they going to find other cuts? Are they going to touch the Pentagon budget? Or are they just going to continue to mislead people that they can do this without cutting Medicaid, which the president said clearly he would not do, which Congress is clearly saying something differently. But each house has different proposals, and so we just have to wait and see what the number is. But our ability to backfill all these federal cuts, no, we're not going to be in a position to do that. We just are not in that position. But we may be in a position. You know, it's the old adage: you can't do everything, but you can do anything. There may be areas where we can make adjustments, but if you're looking at $1 trillion of cuts, and let's just assume California is 15% of that, we're not going to be in a position to offset all of those cuts into our state. But there may be categories where we actually can address the concern.
and both of them said that they wouldn't be able to afford the $100 premium. I just want to read what one of them said. She said, they say that we are the largest economy. It's not fair that the poor have to pay what we don't have. So what do you say to her and others who are feeling that you're leaving them?
Well, I mean, we've provided more support than any state in American history, and we'll continue to provide more support than any state in American history. And we can deny that we have a shortfall. We can deny that we have a deficit. We can deny we have a problem in the system, and we could put it off and be irresponsible. We can cut other critical services for individuals like that in terms of public. I don't know if they have kids in public schools. Trying to avoid cuts there that are the material. I'm trying to avoid massive cuts, roll back progress on critical issues like child care. There's other things that we're trying to protect as well. But look, people pay premiums. They pay copays. People in covered California pay higher premiums than we're requesting of people that are afforded first in the nation status to even access health care. And so under those under those circumstances, I would say to that individual, I'm really proud the state is even able to do as much as we are doing and more than any other state in the country. Yeah, but many are. Many people that are lower middle class are paying premiums. Some as low as $136, others tiered up. But you're right. And that's why we have Medicaid. But again, we're just doing something no other state has done. And we can't do as much of it as we could before.
I'm wondering, in light of the reduction in the Prop 47 times, are you worried that if you don't put in more money to backfill those losses, that some of the progress that you talked about being proud of on, behavioral health, addiction treatment, mental health care, are you worried that state will have to take a step back?
Quite the contrary. We're flooding the zone with more mental health support than any time in American history. There's never been a jurisdiction that's done more. And we just flooded the zone with $3.3 billion of projects, 214 to be exact, 5,100 beds, 20+ thousand outpatient beds. Flooding the zone in terms of the CalAIM investments, whole person care, the work we're doing with the expansion, the waivers we received through the Biden administration in the behavioral health space, and providing eligibility for rental assistance under the BH Connect waiver. So quite the contrary. The money that we're providing workforce, the $1.4 billion over 5 years, the Mental Health Services Act reforms that go into effect in July of next year that provide 30% of the funds under the Mental Health Service Act to go into housing supports to prioritize that population. The work we've done 0 to 26 for our kids, the work we're doing in the wellness centers in our public schools, community schools. We have truly flooded the zone in this space. Now, as it relates to the issue of Prop 47, they're basically just sweeping dollars for similar programs, but they can lay claim to those dollars under the Prop 36 rubric. And that's what the initiative requires us to do, and that's what we're doing. As it relates to the burdens on the taxpayers, where it impacts budgets elsewhere in terms of incarceration costs that were unfunded, we'll absorb those costs pursuant to the will of the voters, just like we're absorbing billions and billions of dollars of costs under the expansion under Prop 35, which costs over $10 billion in the next few years, one of the reasons the budget grows.
I've asked you about this before the measure passed, and you had said at the time Prop 1 funds
Well, Prop 1 was never conceived for this, quite the contrary. I mean, Prop 1 was promoted for the purposes that the voters embraced. Prop 36 was never even a concept at the time. Prop 33, look, the retail theft reforms the legislature made have had real impact. The Prop 36 impacts, we'll see. We'll see what happens over time. They're going to be able to take the Prop 47 money. It's going to be down to what we estimate in the current budget. If you take a look at the 8 pages, down to 27.1 million from the 91.5. They'll have those resources. The counties, I was a former county mayor. It's their job. It's not just the state's not the only spigot. Counties have to do their job. And there are a lot of supervisors in the counties that promoted it. So this is their opportunity to step up, fund it. There are city mayors that supported it. It's their opportunity to step up, fund it, provide your city with all the resources you need. They should, if this is their top priority over other things. But just saying there needed to be a state pill to solve all their problems was not what the voters required us, quite the contrary. I don't know if I'm happy or concerned. Oh gosh, concerned. Well, I won't deal with a hypothetical because I read the parole reports. So on the basis of a recommendation, I reject the parole board's recommendations often. I'll send back en banc for a full review. Parole recommendations, I'll reject them, reverse them completely. And obviously, I have great respect for their judgment and the very relatively small percentage of parole applications they actually approve and tend to approve most of them. Specific to the Menendez case. So the judge in the resentencing made them eligible for parole. We started a process, as you know, which was intended to help inform the judge in the resentencing of the risk assessment. We thought that would be prudent to do before any resentencing. That process has unfolded over the course of the last number of months, and forensic psychologists did an assessment of the risk of each individual brother. That was debated, the district attorney debated, the victim's family, and the judge himself debated the merits and demerits of whether or not that should be included in the proceedings, and a lot of that was discussed publicly, another conversation, some of it behind closed doors. That's one component part of the process that's unfolding that is supposed to conclude on June 13th as it relates to the parole board's actions. That's a very similar process to a traditional parole process. So the question for the parole board is, will they reserve that as a more traditional parole process, or will they choose to have a separate pathway to a independent parole analysis? And that's a conversation that we're having to make that determination. So it's conceivable, to the point, that on June 13th, there could be a recommendation to me. I'm the ultimate arbiter. We'll have to review the parole board's recommendations and report, that we can get that report. It's also conceivable that will happen months and months later. So that's a process that we're making, that's being determined in real time.
Next to our media station across California. Thanks for taking the time. Now to an issue I didn't hear in the presentation. I'm going to have to read the budget summary as well.
God bless.
It's in the document. But several of our viewers, I think, across the Central Valley are impacted by high-speed rail. Of course, we heard the president mention this. Most recently was the Prime Minister of Canada last week. What is the message you want to send on high-speed rail? Are you prepared to fund it? Would you like to see cuts? What's your message on it?
Well, we're moving forward with high-speed rail. As you know, we're finally actually building this system out. I figured someone would ask. I just think this is interesting. I think it's time to pull out a pencil, maybe a pen. 1 year after California voters approved the high-speed rail in the state of California, Texas did the same. I just think this is interesting. In 2009, that Texas system was to go between Dallas and Houston. That project de facto was abandoned just a few weeks ago because they weren't able to even put an inch, let alone a mile, of track down over the course of the last 15 or so years. You can see the progress we've actually made with our high-speed rail system. We're now on the other side of the environmental reviews. We're on the other side of the land acquisition. Let me give you a specific. 2,270 parcels. I don't even know if it's up there, but 2,270 parcels we've brought in to the high-speed rail system. 98% plus, almost 99% of this first phase project is environmentally cleared. So all of the challenges, the burdens, and by the way, we want to learn from that with the Delta Conveyance Project, which is in this budget and one of the most important projects in the United States of America and one of the most important climate adaptation projects in this country. We have got to move that project forward and learn the lessons from the high-speed rail. And we have specific trailer bill language on that in this budget. But we're now on the other side, and we want to get this done. And you saw just a few weeks ago, we were in the valley. They're actually, and forgive me, it's a technicality, they're laying tracks to get to where they start to lay the tracks. It's a technical way of actually doing the development in phases. So real tracks are being laid, and the formal track that will be the first in the nation high-speed rail track is about to take place. And so I want to get it done. And that's our commitment. That's why it's still reflected in the cap and trade extension. And our commitment is firm.
Hi, Governor. Daniela Pardo with Spectrum News, and I'm the last question.
Okay.
You actually started this week talking about how you want the cities and counties to do more with the funding that's been given to them to address homelessness. You said the state has done its part, and then today you said, I'm very negative about the performance at the local level. The head of Counties Association is saying that there's no money in this proposal for successful local efforts to address homelessness or for counties to implement Prop 36. Your response to that, and are you considering giving cities and counties a deadline to meet what you want from them?
Well, who's the individual? Is there a name? Oh, Graham. So I'd encourage Graham to take a look at the 5,100 beds that are going to 54 of the 58 counties in the state of California. Unprecedented investments in terms of infrastructure. I'd encourage Graham to take a look at the details of the reform as it relates to the Mental Health Service Act reform that will provide 30% of those dollars ongoing for housing services for those that are struggling with behavioral health issues, meaning substance abuse and mental health. I hope he would consider the unprecedented nature of those investments. I hope he would consider the unprecedented nature of the waiver, BH Connect, as it relates to eligibility under the Medicaid system, Medi-Cal, for short-term support. I also hope he would consider the mobile crisis reference that I advanced in the budget. I hope he will take a look at the website we put together that showcases all of the reforms in the homelessness space, including all of the funds that are unprecedented in this space. The counties haven't even received the $1 billion yet that we just provided last year. They're about to receive them again. When I was mayor, we didn't receive $1. And I never would have said what the head of the CSAC said. As a county mayor, I said it's our responsibility. And the city and counties have to step up. I just want more accountability at the county level. I don't hear many mayors saying, well, those counties are really working extraordinarily collaboratively with us. I'd like to deal with that issue. By the way, Prop 1 deals with that issue as it relates to one single plan at every county level for behavioral health. Our accountability website is about that, to shed a light on people that are actually performing and those that are not. I highlighted Turlock a moment ago. I'm not trying to point fingers, but my gosh, the state has never done more in its history. We've flooded the zone. It's time to move on from stale talking points and step up. There are counties that are doing incredible work. We applaud them. There are many cities doing extraordinary work. I applaud them. There are many cities that are not and many counties that are not. They just have to do their job. And I am just, on behalf of the taxpayers of the state, in the spirit of Ashley's question, I'm not interested. I'm just not, as a taxpayer, not just governor, I'm not interested in funding failure anymore. I'm not. I won't. Time to do your job. People are dying on their watch. Dying on their watch. How do people get reelected? Look at these encampments. They're a disgrace. They've been there years and years and years and years. I've heard that same rhetoric for years. People are dying. Kids are being born. Overdoses. I met a young man, literally, was out there doing Project Homeless Connect, reaching out near the 405 freeway. I found out the next day he was dead. In the name of compassion, because we had a notice. I could have helped him that night. I felt like a fraud. I felt like I let him down. We got to be more aggressive. I saw a young child, a young kid in San Diego, was with the mayor of San Diego right before his State of the State. This poor kid was addicted to meth. He was a wonderful kid. And he said, I'm really glad you came. He goes, I'm struggling. And there in the tent with his wife was a newborn baby. He said, thank you for coming. There's no compassion in denying what the hell's going on in the streets and sidewalks. They need to step up. Enough of the rhetoric. I'm serious. Enough of the rhetoric. People are dying in this state. It is a disgrace. It is one of the principal reasons people are so angry. They don't trust politicians. They don't like what they see. I'm sorry to get so intense about it. It's a moral issue. They need to do their job. And if they can't do it, let me know. Just say we give up. And then we'll intervene. We'll come up with different strategies and different approaches, but I'm sick and tired of all the barriers and all the BS and all the excuses. So that's the spirit of this model ordinance. And what this model ordinance does and what we're promoting. And so I hope people take a good look at it, and I hope they take me very seriously. I got 2 more swings at the bat. I'm not naive, but I'm done. I'm just done with the excuses. Period. Full stop.
If you don't mind just answering the other part of my question, have you considered giving cities and counties a deadline to show you those results?
Yes and yes. I mean, I had to reject their homeless plans 3 years ago, demanded more ambition, came out with an executive order a year and a half ago in LA, came out with a model ordinance, had to do an amicus brief. Everybody's a damn victim. Amicus brief for grants. We can't do anything because of grants passed. Then grants pass. We can't do anything without support. Well, then we flooded the zone with encampment resolution grants. They said, well, 50 million is not enough. So we did 750 million. Well, we have no zoning. We got the zoning done in room key and home key. So we need mental health. They said it's really a mental health issue. I said, great. Oh, we don't have conservatorship. We got a little bit of conservatorship for it. Well, it's not just that. There's people that are then we did care court. I mean, at a certain point, enough's enough, and that's why the accountability website. But I'm sorry to be, you can describe me any way you wish. I've been described worse, I assure you. People are dying on our watch. I'd rather they own up to that fact and stop with the rhetoric that to me dates back to the 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010. This state has never done more, never cleaned more barriers, never created more pathways and opportunities. Now prove that this is not a waste of taxpayers' time and resources. Thank you for the last question. It was a spirited question, but you said it very, very responsibly. My response was certainly more spirited. But we hope we are responsible in this approach to the budget. Some difficult choices, sure. But I think the totality of what we're protecting and who we're protecting, I think, is consistent with our values. But clearly, we're not in a position to continue to do as much as we wish to do and want to do. And so it's in that spirit that we ask the legislature to take a good, hard look at this year's challenge and next year's challenge as well. We cannot let ourselves off the hook. The uncertainty around Trump and the Trump cuts and congressional cuts only underscore your questions in that space, the imperative of taking seriously the multi-year. The revenue side was definitely impacted by the recklessness of Trump's policies, which, by the way, are universally accepted as being reckless. Hardly a news item today that the governor of California is doubling down on that. But there are investments that we are making that we simply cannot continue to make and balance our budget over the multi-year. And that is reflected in the approach we're taking here today to balance this next fiscal year's budget and to substantially address budget year +1 and significantly reduce the out years and the impacts of more uncertainty. So with that, the budget presentation will now begin. With the finance chair, Joe, thanks for all your hard work. Thank you, HD, for correcting anything I made, any mistakes I may have made, and to Erica for all your hard work, and team finance, well done, and thank you guys for preparing today's budget. Oh, 6.4. Correct that right away. I said 10.4, 6.4%.
Yes. So as the governor just noted, when he had the slide up that referenced the uninsured rate in the state of Texas and noted that California's rate may be around 10%, it's really around 6.4%. So good afternoon, everyone. Joe Steffenshaw, Director of Department of Finance. I will give some brief remarks and then open up for any additional questions if there are any. First, I just want to take a second to thank all of the staff at the Department of Finance on the budget line. We have our managers here, our executive office, but also all their staff, all the staff outside of the budget line at Finance. We really have an reasonable timeline to get the May revision done after we're able to finalize our revenue forecast once we have the April revenue data in. And so we have a number of folks who have been working day and night over the last couple of weeks and months really to get this done. I really appreciate all the hard work that's gone into this. Likewise, would like to thank our partners at the governor's office who've worked with us to get this done, and all the agencies and departments. And I want to give special thanks to Chief Deputy Director for Budgets, Erica Lee, who is just amazing and wouldn't be able to do this job without her. With that said, just a couple of additional points I want to make. The governor kind of went over everything in depth. First, just to clarify a couple of points on the $16 billion impact of the current federal administration on our revenues. The governor mentioned that's over 2 fiscal years, which is correct. So it's over the current fiscal year and the budget year, not the budget year plus one. For the freeze on enrollment for the undocked population, he mentioned the $3.3 billion in savings, and that is in the 28-29 fiscal year. So that's when it grows to that amount in the last year of our multi-year. And then also in the reference to the loans from special funds, the unfair and law fund and the labor and workforce development fund, those are loans to the general fund, not sweeps of money from those funds. With that, I just want to quickly emphasize a couple of points that the governor made. Number one, just on the approach in this budget and why we're taking the approach that we are now. As you all recall, the last couple of years, and the governor had a slide on this, we had faced some deficits, some sizable deficits due to the correction in the revenues that we experienced, and we were able to get by the last couple of years by primarily incorporating short-term, one-time solutions, reductions, fund shifts, borrowing from special funds, those type of things. We're at the point now, and we recognize, and the governor recognizes at the governor's budget, that we see some ongoing structural imbalance in our budget, and recognize that the governor's budget that we'd have to address that at the May revise. So we signal that in January, and we're at this point now. Governor mentioned several times that the approach in this budget is really meant to substantially address the ongoing imbalance that we see in our budget going forward. Along those lines, the governor mentioned the reductions in the budget that are around $5 billion in the budget year. Just want to note that those reductions, while about $5 billion in the budget year, actually grow in the out years. And so by the last year of our forecast, 28-29, our total solutions in that year are around $16.9 billion, and around $14.8 billion of those are from reduction. So we're taking actions this year to get on top of our ongoing structural balance to help ensure that California is on solid fiscal footing going forward. Also, just a little bit more on the revenues. The governor had mentioned a couple times that through April, we were approximately $7.9 billion above the governor's budget forecast. So we had seen some positive performance in our revenues so far since the release of the governor's budget. And that kind of continued the trend of what we saw through the fall last year and leading up to the governor's budget. And of that $7.9 billion. Just want to say that about $3 billion of that is what we are projecting is going to be shifted to October due to the LA County delay in filing and tax payments due to the January fires. And so seeing that positive performance as through April, as the governor noted, our economic forecast and our revenue forecast are both downgraded pretty significantly due to the current economic situation. And those are based on national models that we use, pretty consistent with most forecasts out there. And so we could begin to see a softening of revenues pretty quickly going forward at the end of this fiscal year and into the next year, and really see a downgrade in our revenues over the next fiscal year and the following fiscal year, budget year plus one in 26-27. So with that, I am open to taking any additional questions if there are any out here.
Numbers. So to me, that indicates that this deficit is driven more by cost increases to things like medical. Am I understanding that correctly? That this is really deficit driven by the spending side and not a reduction in revenue.
So they're both factors, both significant factors. So and as he mentioned a couple of times, if it weren't for the reduction in revenue, we would be in a lot better position to, at least in the short term, handle the increase in costs that we're seeing. But the increase in costs are a factor here. And in terms of the total spending, we are just a little bit below where we were at the governor's budget. And a lot of that is due to the increase in costs that we're seeing. And Governor mentioned one of the big drivers there is in Medi-Cal. And what we've seen since the governor's budget is Medi-Cal costs increasing in the budget window by about $10 billion. So significant increase there. And given the very tough choices that were made to finalize this budget to ensure that we're able to deal with the ongoing deficits that we have, Medi-Cal, unfortunately, is one of the biggest general fund programs and the program that's really been growing the most that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Besides Medi-Cal, are there any other programs that
There are other, when we look at, what we would assume is a reasonable normal rate of revenue growth going forward, around 5%, give or take a few points there. There are some other programs that we are seeing that have higher growth, and another one that has one of the significant reductions related to here is in the IHSS program. So given the amount of uncertainty that the governor talked a lot about, we had to make sure that we were striking a balance of taking a big step in addressing out-year deficits, but with understanding there's still a lot of uncertainty going forward, and we did have a significant downgrade to our forecast now. We also don't want to be in a situation where we're going too far, and we understand that we had kind of this underlying imbalance in our budget going forward in the out years at the governor's budget that we've kind of seen, in the LAO remarked on it. And I think the steps we're taking now really do result in making significant progress in addressing what we think is kind of that underlying imbalance that we've seen.
And then on higher ed funding, I've said from
That's correct. So we've talked with those segments a lot, and as Governor outlined, there's been a lot of progress that have been made with the compact, and want to make sure that we can continue to make progress in those areas that we've been working with the segments on. Also, hearing from them on the pressures that they're facing, and so we just wanted to strike a balance there where we are still implementing an ongoing reduction, but it's at a level that's a lot less than was assumed at the governor's budget in the 2024 budget agreement, and takes into account all of the feedback that we've heard from the segments on what their needs are.
Thanks for your question. Really know how to be here. The budget says that they were $760 from. We can expand on what that looks like.
So we are, I think the outline in the 8 pages states, in the budget summary states, we're expecting to bargain at the table with the open units and open the contracts for the existing units, the units that have existing contracts out there. And the intent really is to, so we'll have to go through those negotiations with the units, but the intent is really to avoid increased costs in the upcoming fiscal year, and it's not to implement furloughs or PLPs or those type of things. It's really to avoid some increased costs that we would see from employee compensation.
And then so the bargaining.
That's not included in the budget. We're not assuming in the budget that 1% is going to affect, and the proposals that you initially identified is our proposal related to employee compensation. It's really to achieve savings, and so we're not in a position to be able to provide that additional 1% at this time. We do have those numbers. So I don't get them wrong. Lupe can follow up with you. Yes. After this or offline, we'll make sure we get you those exact numbers. Well, we're working with the legislature now on what the proposal could look like. And we know there's also ACA out there that's similar to what the governor proposed in January. We are open to what that higher amount should be. I think besides what the mandatory cap should be, the key is to ensure that deposits are exempt from the GAN limit, and that would provide us some additional flexibility to save even more. But we are, it's important, as the governor, I think, has stated in the last few budget presentations, to save more in the rainy day fund during the upswings so we can better manage these revenue corrections that we know we're going to have and we faced in the last couple of years. So we feel that our proposal would go a long way in meeting the goals there. We're definitely open to conversations with the legislature and others on what those right amounts should be. So I think first, kind of reiterating something that the governor expressed, it's difficult with all the moving pieces in DC that are definitely being proposed, considered to for us to make decisions on what we're going to do here in California until we have some certainty on what's going to happen in DC. So we know that at least under the current structure that the pass-through entity elective taxes provided a benefit here and a way to mitigate some of the negative consequences of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And so we are still moving forward with our proposal. I think we're still evaluating what those impacts from DC may be, and at some point we may have to make some adjustments. There is related to journalism funding. There is still resources that are included in the budget, but it's been reduced. It's not $30 million anymore. I believe the amount that's contained in the May revision is around $10 million.
Can I just I just want to clarify. I know that the budget says that it could be a potential $10 million increase in medical costs if these policies are not implemented going forward to the next fiscal year. The last number we heard was 9.5 billion, I believe. Is that number higher according to current estimates?
So in that number, in terms of the increase in cost of Medi-Cal for the entire program, about $10 billion. So it's just not the undocumented population. So I mean, it's always, the estimate's always moving, but in kind of at this time, that is the May revision estimate of what the increase in cost would be. Yeah. In terms of what is the estimate of the undocumented population, we do have a revised estimate, and we'll also get you that offline here since it's over.
The question I have is, I know that the government said that the priority is to preserve basic care that people need and depend on. I mean, there's an elimination of dental benefits in here for population, and also long-term care elimination. I mean, those seem like
these were very tough decisions to figure out how we could best preserve care and also deal with the budget challenges that we're facing now. And I think the governor can reiterate the point a number of times. We are doing our best to preserve as much as we can and put ourselves in a position to continue to move forward and continue to make progress going forward once we kind of reset, understand how we can better manage costs going forward. With all that said, this is the governor's proposal to the legislature, and we know we're going to have conversations with them over this next few weeks on what the final budget will be, and we are open to alternatives that meet the goals of protecting as much as possible while also balancing the budget going forward. Look, I mean, it's kind of similar to what some of the governor's comments earlier. I mean, it's an investment that is leveraging potentially a lot more federal funds to really spur innovation in Silicon Valley, and the the $25 million will potentially result in, I think it was $1 billion of investment there. And so we feel like that's a given the limited ability to make investments now, investments that leverage federal funds are something that we focused on the last couple of years. And this is an area where we know we have more work to do given the change in administration, but as we still see it as a win for the state, that we're still going to move forward and hoping that the legislature will agree with us there. Yeah, we haven't moved those funds into a particular budget at this time, and those details are still being finalized. And so once those discussions are done, we will effectuate the transfer of those funds into a departmental or organizational budget. I just know that the conversations are ongoing. That's part of the reason why the funds are still budgeted the way that they are, and so there's still more to come there.
It also includes things here, a proposal to freeze enrollment. I mean,
No, that's only for the undocumented population. Yes, it's undocked. So yes, and we can clarify for you here too, but it's undocked. Yeah.
What point in time with the tariffs is that based on? It changed quite a bit. So at what point did you guys sort of like cut off the
Yeah. So our forecasts always have to be point in time in order to make sure that we have them in place to finish the development of the governor's budget and then the mayor revision. So the forecast was based on a national April forecast, and we use that to build the our California economic forecast. So we use a national forecast as a basis. So it was April. We have seen that the forecasts that we do use, their May forecast, there's not a lot of difference in terms of the economic indicators that we use to inform our budget. So there hasn't been a lot that's changed. We do know, I get the question all the time, markets just went up the last hour. Things should be okay now, right? And so unfortunately, that's not, we can't react in the moment. And there is a higher level of uncertainty now that's kind of built into our economic forecast going forward, and that has not changed since we finalized our forecast.
tariff policy changed? I've lost count on how many times during the month of April.
Yeah.
Does that
So the U.S. forecast that we used was from the beginning of April, but our forecast was finalized probably a few weeks later, and we do make adjustments. One based on California, I do believe there were some adjustments based on the tariff policies there, but with the changes, and even with the changes that have recently happened, again, I just want to emphasize that that hasn't changed kind of the uncertainty that's in the forecast and outlook. And we also know that regardless of what's happened in the markets these last couple of days, which is a good thing, and hopefully it's sustained, that there are still tariffs in place, and we are going to see the impacts of those going forward. Yeah, there's always uncertainty there, but we learned a lot in 2023, and in 2023 we had the tax filing and payment deadlines delayed for essentially the entire state to October and then eventually November. And we were doing at that time, just so happened to be the year that we were also trying to reconcile the largest spike that we've ever seen in capital gains tax in our state. So I think number one, we don't have that situation in terms of the huge spike in capital gains that we're trying to understand at this point. And we also did learn from the experience of what happened in 2023. And so we feel, there's always uncertainty, but we feel that we're better positioned to understand how to make that projection, and then also how to limit our risk in making that projection. Yeah, well, look, the GGRF the last couple of years has been used as a tool to help offset some of the budget problems that we face. This year, and as Governor mentioned, that ensuring that we are maintaining CAL FIRE's operations and the use of this funds is appropriate to do that. Not only funds a critical service for the state, but also helps to offset or mitigate the impacts of the budget shortfall that we're facing. We are not presenting a full GGRF spending plan at the May revise, so those are discussions that we're going to have over the coming weeks with the weeks and potentially months, but over the coming weeks at least with the legislature. Say besides the CAL FIRE proposal and the and high-speed rail, the rest of the spending plan will be open to discussions going forward, recognizing that there are going to have to be some trade-offs in order to ensure that we're able to offset CAL FIRE's general fund costs.
I have a follow-up question about Prop 35. I know that the governor, I think, told that going toward Medi-Cal base rates, but I'm not really understanding, is it not going to the buckets that were specified in Prop 35 and voted on by voters? Where's that money going that's been collected, and if you're diverting it to other purposes than what's outlined in the
So there's growth in the underlying Medi-Cal base rates. So the money is going to fund that growth, and that we feel is allowable under the rules of Prop 35. It doesn't conflict with the non-supplementation clause of the proposition. So it's going to fund base growth and not going to those buckets.
across the board, or there's primary care?
There are some. So it's not all of the funding that was dedicated to specific buckets within Prop 35, but I think that's another thing. We do have the breakout of that, and Lupe again can help fill in with those details. Yeah.
Thank you.
This is a small thing, but just bits of funding that gets just deferred back a year, like the LCFF, where what's the sort of the reason behind doing that? Whereas the governor says you could have used it this year and reason behind putting the deferral into
So that's within Prop 98, and the deferrals there are, it's not, it's to ensure we're able to continue to fund the base programs within Prop 98, but it's a kind of a common mechanism that we use within Prop 98 to ensure that we are able to provide stable funding year over year. And we actually had deferrals from prior years that we're paying off this year before we do that deferral into the next year.
Hello. I wanted to just double check. I did not see HAP appear anywhere in the budget. Is that
We're not providing additional funding for HAP in the May revise. The governor mentioned that there's this year's HAP funding that is yet to even go out. That's going to go out in the next few months, I believe. But we're not providing additional HAP funds at the May revision.
$12 million set aside for reparations program. Is that still available for that, or what?
That money is still available and will begin to be allocated as we finalize the budget for this year.
And another to increase pay for incarcerated firefighters. Is that included in any of the budget lines?
No, those proposals are not included in the May revision.
Curious about the Call Out X initiative. I know that that's like $100 million has been allocated for two parts of that program, one of which doesn't seem to be moving forward at the moment. Where that money has it been spent? Is that something that is impacted potentially?
Yeah, some of the money has been spent. We are, I think, reappropriating a small piece of that money, and then we are, as part of the solution for the budget, we are reducing the amount of that appropriation
So
as
it will no
well.
longer be $100 million for the two.
The total amount will not be $100 million any longer. So there, it is reduced by a certain amount that we can get to you.
And can you also give us a portion?
Yeah.
A lot of Silicon Valley companies
I have not had any direct conversations with any of those companies, so that they have not influenced our thinking around this budget or the impacts on the economy or our revenues.